Hey friends, how are you? Welcome back. I am Elizabeth. This is Reading Wryly, and today we're going to talk about all of the books that I read in August. This is a reading wrap-up. Let's do it. If you're new to my channel, my name is Elizabeth. I read thriller, horror, feminist fiction. I am obsessed with psychology and why people behave the way that they do. I read 8 books in the month of August. So I'm going to tell you about all of those. I will, as usual, break this up down to the chapters below to make this a little easier for you to navigate if you're interested in specific books or hearing about specific books. I will rate these starting with my lowest rated and work my way up to the highest rated, saving my favorite for last. I have quite a few awesome books to talk about this month. I have 3 5-star books, which is pretty insane. The most I've had all at once in a long time. Everything that I have to talk to you about today is a 3.5 star or higher. Also, if you're new, the way I rate my books, it's 1 through 5. I do use half stars, and I will round it up on Goodreads if I give it a rating with a half star. Also, anything 3 stars or higher, I would recommend. If you're interested in joining my free online book club, it's called the Midnight Society Book Club. You can find me on Instagram for up-to-date details on when the live show is. We just all read the same book in the month, and then you can follow me live at the end of the month when I discuss it with some of my co-hosts. In the month of September, we will be reading The Unmothers. This is a new release horror book by Leslie J. Anderson. I think it's horror anyway. It's a folk horror mystery, and we're following a protagonist who is a journalist and goes to this small town on an assignment after the death of her husband, and she's trying to figure out what's going on in this town because there have been reported incidents that a horse has given birth to a healthy human being. So it's gonna be weird, it's gonna be out there. I think it's gonna be very feminist. I've got my copy on the way right now. And that live show is going to be on Thursday evening, September 26th. So that's the last Thursday in September, 7 p.m. Central Time. If you're interested, you don't have to pay for anything. You just hang out, we talk about it. All right, let's get into the books. Like I said, I'm going to start with my lowest rated book, and this month it's kind of a surprising lowest rated because this one was pretty highly anticipated for me, and I think is still pretty anticipated for a lot of people. That is The Night Guest by Hildur Knutsdottir. Knutsdottir. I knew what it was at a point. Darn it. Anyway, I gave this 3.5 stars. I still really recommend this. It's a very short book, and it's translated from Icelandic by Mary Robinette Cowell. I think I know what this probably did in its own language. I don't know, I have such a hard time trusting that what the author originally intended, that it's even possible for all of that to even be carried over into another language, and I don't think it is. So I do feel like there was something missing here. Tonally, I didn't quite get where this was going, what it was trying to do. This is one of those psychological thrillers where it's asking you if you want to believe this narrator is unreliable or if this is supernatural. And I do think this is trying to have commentary on a lot of things about women, which is why I'm even a little bit more disappointed that it didn't hit just right for me. But hopefully it could do that for someone else. Oh my god, it comes out today as of filming. How funny. So it's out today. Happy publishing day! September 3rd it is as of filming. 200 pages, so it's very quick to read. One thing that this story did really well is create that sense of dread, that sense of suspense of like, oh my gosh, what is happening? I would say this reminds me of Insomnia by Sarah Pinborough a little bit, and that mounting paranoia, that dread we're questioning throughout if we can rely on our narrator or not. And then it also reminded me a little bit of Julia Armfield's Our Wives Under the Sea, in the sense that it has this ambiguity to it and this otherness or this monstrousness that is kind of a side thing, but it's how it's being compared to this and the way that it's being talked about. So this is set in Iceland, in contemporary Reykjavik. Our main character who we're following, her name is spelled like this. It's hard because I listened to the audiobook, and so I want to see the lips moving so I know like what it actually is, but it sounded like Yvonne, but the V made like more of a TH sound, like Ethan, like that. So I think that's her name, Ethan. She has this very distinct character voice. She's got this sassiness to her that I really like. Throughout this, we're in her head, and that's why I'm saying we're not sure if we can trust her, because she may sound sure, but does she know? Like, we don't know if we can trust what she knows. She keeps thinking that she's getting a full night's sleep, and then she wakes up and she feels terrible, like she hasn't had a wink of sleep in days, weeks, whatever. Also, on top of that, she's got injuries. Like, how is she getting these injuries just in bed? And so she goes to see this doctor, and of course he can't find anything that's wrong with her. And so he's saying, well, ma'am, have you considered that you're exaggerating? Have you considered that this is all in your head? Like, he doesn't say that, but essentially that is where this like kind of commentary is coming in about women not being believed, women being called hysterical or sent away for the most ridiculous of reasons. It's having some commentary on that, which I like. And I read something that said the author actually had been bedridden for a couple of weeks and just couldn't get out of bed. And that was part of what inspired this, because she went to the doctor and they said, well, there's nothing wrong with you. She's like, but there is. And she ends up getting this watch, like Apple Watch basically, that's counting her steps. And she wakes up one morning to find that she had walked 40,000 steps in the night, which is very hard to do. As we get into the story, we learn more about her family and that she's recently been grieving for a death in the family. That comes into play. Here's an interesting review that I found. This is from NewYorkJournalOfBooks.com, and this is written by Elaine Margolin. She said, readers who think closely about Knutsdottir's turbulent work will recognize her protagonist as one of the post-wounded feminists Leslie Jamison has written about. Jamison describes these women as lost in a state of helplessness. Jamison describes their pain as those who have transitioned from performing woundedness, rising above it, and performing it again in jaded array. They have become obsessed with the perfection of their own demise. They often take drugs or booze or have sex. It doesn't really matter the act because they are always floating above it. They have lost their reflective voice, obliterated their backstory, and transformed themselves into a void of sorts that simply waits for a final act to sweep them away. Knutsdottir has written an arresting novel about the intricacies and invisibility of female pain and the staggering cost of ignoring it. I think she definitely took away more from this than I did, though I like it. This would be good for thriller fans that are looking to kind of dip their toes into some horror because of the body horror that's going on in here. There is some really gruesome scenes that are depicted in here, as well as animal deaths. So you have been warned on that one. There are animal deaths and human deaths for that matter. Also, I listened to this from Macmillan. I had the audio ALC, advanced listeners copy. You want just like a quick, fast-paced, interesting psychological thriller meets horror, then try this one. It's a really fast read too. My next 3.5 star that I'm going to talk to you about is The September House. This is by Carissa Orlando, and I think this was her debut novel as well. I read this in a vlog that I will link above and below if you're interested in checking that out. This is a haunted house story, but it's doing it differently than I think any other haunted house story that I've read. I really appreciate this. It didn't hit the way that I think it did hit for some people, but I really like what she did with this, and I like her originality. And it's also clearly like feminist as well, talking mainly about this relationship between mother and daughter, talking about agency, and talking about abusive relationships. Yeah, for sure. It is psychological. It's got a humor to it and like a cozy quality to it, almost like a cozy mystery, but then not. It kind of subverts that. That's why it's so different, but that's also the thing that's making me pause, like, do I get along with this or not? I'm not sure. Because tonally, it's just different from other haunted house stories that I've read. This also is following the perspective of an older woman, which I usually really enjoy, but for some reason, and maybe it was the case that the audio narrator I just didn't connect with, because I did listen to this via audio. I got this one from Libby. I also had the book from the library. Oh, I have it still. Let's hold it up. Sometimes it's easier just to pop them in after, especially when I have library books and it's so darn shiny. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna pop it up so then you can see it better anyway. Usually I connect with older female characters, but this one I just didn't off the bat. She grew on me though. Her name's Margaret. She's got this perfect Victorian house. She and her husband Hal moved in here. They were not nomads, but they like they never owned a house before, and they always just kind of moved from apartment to apartment. And so when they got the opportunity to buy this house, of course, this is like kind of cliche with a ghost haunted story, of course, but I think it's also playing on that. You know, they had an offer they couldn't refuse. The price was so cheap and it was their dream house, so they moved in. Actually, I think the person who showed them the house did tell them about the deaths there, or at least some of it, but they were like so intrigued by the house that they just blew right past it. Every September, it gets real nasty around there, and there are just ghosts everywhere. All of their little ghosts come out, and Margaret calls them the pranksters. She's like, oh, they're little pranksters. She kind of just figures out how to get in and get on with these people. Hal, on the other hand, is not having it, so he left. And when we enter the story, Hal's already gone. We do get more information as the story goes on from what happened before this part. In present day, Margaret's daughter, Catherine, is calling and has been calling trying to get a hold of her dad. Margaret's been making excuses because she doesn't want Catherine to know the house is haunted. Finally, Catherine has had it, and she's like, I'm coming up there. So she has to figure out how to hide all of this from her because it's about to be September too, and so it's just like, oh gosh, perfect for this time of year to read this in September actually. So if you're interested, pick it up for spooky season. It would be good for that. So she's got to hide all the ghosts. She's got to figure out what to tell her what happened to Hal, because Hal just left and didn't come back. There's a lot of unreliable narrator stuff happening in this, and usually I really enjoy this trope, but I've got to say I'm starting to get a little bit, like it's starting to get old for me, especially with the women. Like, it's always women. Before Catherine gets there, of course, we have Margaret's point of view telling us what's what, who's who, what's going on. But then when Catherine gets there and we get her perspective, it seems like now that maybe Hal and Margaret's relationship wasn't what Margaret was making it out to be. Or maybe Margaret just led Catherine to believe that because she didn't want her to find out about the ghosts or have to tell her about the ghosts. So you can see how it's almost got that like fever dreamish quality because you're not like sure what the heck's going on. Some of the ghosts are kind of funny, interesting, quirky characters. There's a maid, Francesca, and Francesca is a really sweet maid. She's very attentive. She really just like only wants to serve, and she's actually helpful to Margaret. Like, she'll get her tea, she'll like clean the house and stuff. The one thing about her is that she's got a gaping axe wound in the middle of her forehead. And that's what I'm talking about, where it's like this like kind of cozy humor, but it's like, oh, don't mind her. Margaret's like, you get used to it. You get used to it. Hal didn't like it, but you know, Margaret doesn't see any problem with it. Not easy to look at, but like she said, you get used to it. There's this other kid, Elias, who is kind of like temperamental, but as long as you stay out of his way, he won't hurt you. But otherwise, if you get in his space, he might bite. Like, he's a biter. And then there's Master Vale, who's in the basement. We start to hear some of the history of this house, and Master Vale is just this like entity that lives in the basement. And then you have the neighbor lady, Edith, who just, you know, pops in for a cup of tea and they chit chat, and Edith doesn't really like going inside or dealing with the ghosts, so they kind of sit on the front porch and just like hang out and chit chat. I felt like it took me some time to get invested into this one, and I can understand why it's been getting some divisive reviews, because I don't think this is going to be for everyone. And then I really liked just the commentary in this about relationships. The house and the spirits are really a metaphor for that. How she has to tiptoe around the house, how she has to walk lightly and play by the rules. There's a whole big theme about playing by the rules, which I really liked. And actually, now that I'm saying it, it reminds me a lot of Megan Fox's poetry that I recently read. There are definitely some themes that overlap. Next up, this is our last 3.5 star book. Everything after this is 4 stars and higher. And this one I'm really like honestly kind of conflicted by, because there are some things I really, really liked about this. But then my experience reading it wasn't awesome. So it's just, I don't know how I fall. And that is We Used to Live Here by Marcus Kliewer. This is kind of almost like cosmic horror, but again, it's almost similarly along the same vein as the September house, where it is kind of a haunted house, but kind of not. We don't know what's going on. We have an unreliable narrator. I really, though, connected to this character more so than the character in September house. This also has queer rep in it, as most of the books I read this month do. I think 6 out of 8 of these, in fact, had queer representation. I'm calling this a psychological horror, but like I said, it kind of borders cosmic. It reminds me a little bit, even though I haven't read it, but of my understanding of House of Leaves. It also reminds me a bit of Paul Tremblay in like its weirdness and the cabin at the end of the world. It's a puzzle that you want to solve. Anyway, we're following Eve and Charlie. They are a female-female couple. They're partners. They bought this house to kind of flip it and then resell it. And it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. The words that I wrote down to describe this were unnerving. Again, dread. It has this like sense of dread, and then also fresh. Like as far as like horror, I feel like this is fresh horror. This is what horror is kind of trending towards right now. This kind of cosmic rabbit hole type stuff. This is also being adapted and starring Blake Lively, so I'm really excited about that. This novel is a psychological horror story about a creepy Lovecraftian type house that offers more mind-bending questions than answers. So Eve I really liked because she's very nervous. She's a little bit paranoid. I related to her a lot as a character. Like she's socially awkward. She doesn't quite know what to say or what the right thing to say is when, and she relies on her partner Charlie a lot for that. Charlie is the house flipper. She's the one that's more assertive. And Eve is a bit on the like fragile side. So one day while Charlie is out, Eve hears a knock at the front door and she answers the door, and it's this man and his entire family saying like, hey, I used to live here as a kid. I'd really love to show the kids and my wife the house, just if I could come in for 5 minutes. It's one of those things where like the second I heard that I was like, no, like if this was me, story over, goodbye, door in your face, you're not coming. No, especially if you're home alone. There's 5 of them, 6, how many of them? 5 of them, I think. But then I put myself in her shoes and she doesn't want to be rude. It does come down to like patriarchy as well and how it makes women feel like we have to be nice, be considerate, be mindful. Little things start happening one after the next. This is why it reminds me of Cabin at the End of the World too. Like the little things where it's like, okay, now that's slightly reasonable. Okay, well now it's, okay, now you have to stay. And she keeps trying to get this family to leave, and it seems like she cannot get them to leave the house. Like once they're in, one thing keeps happening after the next, and it makes sense. Like it's rational. Her decisions are rational, but then she starts to maybe start seeing things, some stuff starts happening that is not normal. It reminds me a lot of Leave the World Behind by Ramona Lam. Definitely giving that energy. There's another one on the tip of my tongue that I'm trying to think of. Oh yes, The Watchers. I thought it was just super original. Just a really new, fresh, original take in the horror genre. I do feel like horror in general is starting to lean more cosmic, which I'm excited about. I'm excited to see where that's gonna go with like the AI stuff, where that's gonna go with stuff like this, or like House of Leaves, where it's like, it just doesn't quite make sense, and maybe what we all think is the truth is not actually the real truth. Okay, yep. And as I was looking at reviews, I found one from Jessica on Goodreads. She said, starts at a 4-star, ends around 3, which I feel like is about what happened for me. It started off a lot stronger and then it lost me a little bit along the way. But she said the discomfort of the violation of social rules, like that's what the sticking point is in this one. That's what really makes it so uncomfortable, is that violation of social rules and how we navigate that. And that's what I related to so much with Eve. So I really liked that part, but the experience for me was kind of like, it's obviously meant to make you feel confused, but in a way that I kept questioning myself and like gaslighting myself at, am I actually understanding this? Oh, Reddit no sleep turned into novels, which I've not gone down that rabbit hole, but I think that's pretty accurate from what I understand. Oh yeah, and it also incorporates some phenomena that are very much real, like doppelgangers or psychological conditions that could appear supernatural but are not. Capgras syndrome, believing someone you know has been replaced by their doppelganger, that's it. Ah! Pareidolia, seeing meaningful things in abstract images like Rorschach tests. So some of these things come into play and it really kind of messes with your idea of what reality is. That's kind of cool. But overall, my experience was jilted. I felt like I got hit by a bus. And it was a hard, difficult read. Like I had to really pay attention and like go back, and it just took a lot of energy out of me. So it did lower my experience, but I do think this is really cool. And I think if you're particularly into that like Reddit no sleep threads, like the rabbit hole of like, what if this is real? It's almost like that X-Files type energy, then I think you would really enjoy this one. I think it's going to be another divisive one for sure. And that one, is it released? Okay, yeah, so this one's a new release, but it's been out since June. So if you've not read this one yet, I think Gabby is going to be reading this with Ashley. Gabby reads Ashley's Little Library for an upcoming book troop book club. So if you're interested in picking it up for that, you know my opinion. I'll be there for the live show. Moving on to my 4-star books, I have 2 4-star books that I read in August that I want to talk to you about. The first one is Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson, another library book that I got, so I'm going to just pop it up there so it's not all glaring at you. Okay, Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. This really surprised me. I think first of all because it was it's written by a male author, I think. Is it?
I don't know. It might not be.
Even if it's not, I had preconceived notions based on the name Kevin. And I thought, just based on this cover, that it was gonna be really literary and it was gonna read dry. While it is written in straightforward prose, it's not boring at all. The tone of this gave me thriller. It gave me almost like Gillian Flynn. Just off the bat, I was in it. And it's so short. It's another one that's just so short, that's doing what it's supposed to be doing and then tweaking it. It's very structured. So I'm going to talk about in a little bit also the Stepford Wives. This was my book club pick for August. These both similarly, they're very short, they're very quick, concise, to the point. They're simplistic in like a deceptive way. Their simplicity is what's like pulling the wool over your eyes. And that's what's good about both of these. But this one, I just loved our main character. We're following, what does it even say on here? Lillian and Madison. So there's kind of a couple different stories going on. There's Lillian and Madison are 2 women, and Lillian's our main character. She's the one that I really liked reading from, getting to know the most. They were unlikely roommates in college, or in high school or college, in this like fancy prep school. It was like a boarding school. And Lillian was there on like scholarship or something. She came from a really tough background. She had a tough childhood. Madison, her dad owned a bunch of businesses and she was just kind of this uptight, rich girl, but also this like ethereal being. I believe there's also some queer rep in this too, because there is like this like sexual tension between the 2 of them this whole time, and you're not really sure like, is that going somewhere? Is that not? But something happened in school and Lillian took the blame for Madison, ended up getting kicked out, and it sent her life on this terrible trajectory. It ruined everything for her. And she's not like even super mad at Madison about it. Madison has this like spell on her. So fast forward 15 years, Lillian is working 2 cashier jobs at competing grocery stores and smoking weed in the attic. She gets a call or a letter from Madison saying like, hey, I need your help. Well, Madison is now married to this like senator, or want to be would-be senator guy. They need a nanny or an au pair or a governess for his 2 kids from a previous marriage. But the problem is that these 2 kids, anytime they get upset,
they combust.
They explode.
They light on fire.
Their clothing just disintegrates and they're running around naked, but they're fine. It's like the weirdest thing. It's like, I love this little bit of magical realism that is put into this spontaneous combustion. This is the catch. She's once again put in this position by Madison. Where this takes a turn that's unexpected is that they kind of end up creating this bond between her and the kids. And it almost turns into this like found family type situation in this just really odd world where these kids just light on fire, and there's political backlash because the dad is in politics and they're trying to keep everything on the hush hush. And it was exciting and it was so much more fun than I expected it to be. It was a fun read, and I understand now why this got all of the credit that it did. I don't think this does what it's doing perfectly, but I think it does it well. I enjoyed reading it a lot. Moving on to my next 4-star book, we have Made for You by Jenna Satterthwaite. I think it's Satterthwaite. That's how they said it on the audiobook, so I'm going with that. Really interesting. It was fun. This is definitely hitting that craving that I have for books about reality TV shows, because it has a reality TV show in here that is essentially The Bachelor. And they're not even trying to pretend that it's not. They're calling it The Proposal. There's this guy, he's the bachelor on The Proposal. His name's Josh LaSala. The way the book is structured is we're getting our current timeline where Josh is with his wife that he chose from the show. Her name is Julia Walden, and she is a synth, or a synthetic
human.
I think it's 14 months after they got married. And then we're also getting flashbacks of them when they were on the show and how they got to know each other on their dates in the fantasy suites, all of the little like behind the scenes fun stuff. Honestly, that part was so much more fun for me than the current day. This definitely gives that 5 minutes in the future feeling, but it's actually set in 2022. So really technically this is altered history. But if you like things like John Mars, where he writes 5 minutes into the future thrillers, then I think you would really enjoy this one. It is on the longer side. This was 400 pages, and the pacing is a little bit slower than your typical thriller because I think you have to add more for that world building. And the world building is really cool. In this world, there were robots before synths. So there are robots around that will like just do daily chores and things like that around the house. But then there are also synths, and synths are much more. Julia is one of them. She is one of 3 that are out in the world. The other 2 are twin sisters, but they're synthetic humans. They're twin sisters that were paid for and made by these billionaire twin brothers. So they married the synths. But now the synths have their own reality TV show that's like Keeping Up with the Kardashians, but it's like keeping up with the synths or something. They're trying to get the right to divorce their husbands because they want to live on their own. They have their own way of making money. So there's all of this like that you would expect in your typical dystopian of like, how is this going to affect the world? What kind of rights do they have? And the other thing is Julia can also give birth. And that was a huge selling point with her, is that she, I think, is the first one that can actually give birth. They do go on to explain how that works. So obviously she's not going to have her own genes. And on that point, when they're going on the like dates and stuff, oh, the hometown dates, where does she go? She doesn't have a hometown. She was literally created for this show. The mystery, the overall mystery is that, you know, it's 14 months later, they have their little baby. She's getting a lot of hate from everyone in this town in Indiana where they're living now. We're getting from her perspective. So we really do kind of understand her on a level that you would need to in order to have this conversation about what makes us human. I think that's the main one. That's the big one. Josh tells Julia that he is going camping, and then he was gonna go meet her creator, Andy, for lunch or something. He just never comes back. She ends up filing a missing persons report. We don't know where he is from the beginning. Like when we jump into the story, she's freaking out, trying to figure it out. Kind of reminds me of the way we jumped into Happiness Falls. Is it a crime? Is it not a crime? What's happening? That is by Angie Kim, if you were wondering. Because she's gotten so much hate in this town and they think she's dangerous anyway, despite her no-harm programming, they immediately go for her. And of course, you have to go for the spouse first when he disappears. I'm not going to say more about it than that. I did like the twist. This one was a lot of fun. If you think you're not going to want to kind of blend that sci-fi element, then just don't read it. But if you typically like books like that and you like thrillers, then this is going to be great for you. 4 stars, like a solid 4 stars. The world building was so good. I really loved the commentary. I loved the reality show element. I got this from Everand. I listened to it on Everand and the audiobook was great. We're moving on to my 5-star books. I have 3 of them, so there are 3 books left to talk about. The first one I want to tell you about is Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. Again, this is a library copy and it's shiny, so I'm gonna put it down here. We'll pop it up here. What to say about this? I love Rachel Harrison's writing. It always makes me feel so good and so seen. She just speaks to my soul, I feel like. And her books are not, they have a lot of commentary, but they're not commentary in the way that feels forceful. It's commentary in a way that feels like you are being seen. It's like the opposite of being othered, reading a Rachel Harrison book. For me anyway. Gosh. I hope it's that way for everyone and not just me. But anyway, this is a werewolf novel. We're not going in here unsuspecting. We know it is a werewolf novel going into it, and we're following Aurora, Rory for short. She is heading back home to her small town from the big city of New York because her twin sister is pregnant. The baby daddy's out of the picture and she needs her support. And so she's putting her entire life on hold in order to go back home and support her sister. But she's got a, relationship with this town that she grew up in that is really not healthy. She just wanted to get out of there as fast as she could. Her relationship with her mom is something that's really central to the story. Her mom seems really shallow, self-absorbed. Rory has been through some stuff with her mom in her past where her mom did not stand up for her in a way that Rory needed her to do. She really can't forgive her mom. She can't understand why her mom can't take some of the blame for that, but her mom is just not in a place, as her sister tells her. Her sister's name is Scarlett. Tells her, mom's just not in a place where if she says she's sorry, then she has to take some of the blame, and she is too fragile for that, and Rory's resentful of that. She shouldn't have to be the strong one. So there's this really in-depth mother-daughter relationship in here and sister relationship that we're talking about. But the main themes in here are transformation. Obviously, it's a werewolf story, weak versus strong, about pushing through fears, about being vulnerable with people and healing, but also being in a space where you can love. This is kind of a love story as well. It's about imperfection. It's about transformation. And the cool thing about the transformation is that, her twin sister is pregnant at the same time that she's turning into a werewolf. She hit an animal on one of the side roads and she got out and she was attacked by it. She thought it was a bear. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a bear. So she's changing and she's feeling out of control and it's very chaotic, and she's trying to support her sister, but she doesn't understand her like she used to. They don't understand each other like they used to. This parallel, like I was saying, between her sister's transformation and growing this child and her own transformation into a werewolf is just like this really cool way to talk about these relationships in this story. So it's not pretentious. It doesn't feel like it's pushing some agenda on you. It's just shining a light on these things that all of us go through, but we don't always talk about. And doing it in a way that is also paying homage to classic horror, which is cool. I was reticent going into this because going into all of her books because it's a werewolf story, a vampire story, and it just seems kind of cliche and like cutesy and whatever. That's not what Rachel Harrison is about. She's not a cutesy author. She has depth. She has nuance to her writing, but it still gives you that like satisfying feel-good feeling when you read her books. So this one I think may be my favorite of hers so far, although I've loved all of them. I still haven't read The Return. I need to get to that one. But that's next on my list from Rachel Harrison. Next 5-star book is Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. He continues to surprise me. I've never read his erotica. So if you're unaware, Chuck Tingle came out last year with his first horror debut novel, and that was Camp Damascus, and we read it for the Midnight Society Book Club, and I really enjoyed it. A lot of social commentary in there about queer tragedy, and that definitely carries over into this one. This one is a harder political statement than something like Such Sharp Teeth, and it's also genre-defying, fighting for the underdog. These characters, they are such well-developed, special characters that you just really do fall for them. But it's also exploring so many things. And like I was saying, he has erotica books as well, which I've never read, but I'm almost curious to read those, even though it's not like up my alley. And he's really reminded me of Grady Hendrix in the style that he writes. It feels inclusive. It feels I wanted to say mindful, but yeah, mindful. He's looking out. He has a purpose. He's making a statement, but he's also entertaining. It's like, how do I do all of these things at one time? And this just coming out a year after Camp Damascus is so impressive to me. Like, how have you been working on both of these? Because like, no way he wrote this in 1 year. There's just so much that goes into it. Again, this one has that kind of X-Files energy to it. If you like that aesthetic, or if you like X-Files, I think you would like this. So Misha's a screenwriter. He has been working on this show, The Travelers, and it's kind of giving X-Files. It's about these two agents who are investigating supernatural things, but they're both women, and there is this very strong undertone of like this attraction between them, but it's never spoken out loud. Like it's this, everybody knows, and it's even gained this queer following because of this, but it's never like, it's always And then mirroring that in real life, Misha has this kind of dual life that he's living where he's in LA and he's totally out here, and he has a boyfriend, Zeke, who is just amazing. He works as like a chemist at a makeup company, and he's like this big buff teddy bear, but back home in Montana, he's not out yet. So he's kind of leading this double life. Like some people know he's out, some people don't, and he doesn't really feel like his whole arc is like trying to come to terms with who he is and understanding that with success comes power, and that he has power that he doesn't have to yield, but he could. And now it's sounding fantasy, and it's not, but it is genre bending. Don't go into this thinking you know what this is, because it's just not that. It kind of reminded me of Paul Tremblay's horror movie that we just recently read for the book club, because it's got the screenwriting aspect, and the audiobook is doing things that I wish that one had done. Again, the audiobook, oh my God, there's so many elements that I want to talk about. The audiobook is incredible. It's narrated by a ton of well-known authors: Stephen Graham Jones, Sarah Gailey, C.J. Lead, T.J. Klune, there's so many. And it's like, I think T. Kingfisher as well. It's like this whole community came together for this book, and it is like a political statement as well. There's another character that I haven't mentioned yet, and that is Misha's best friend, Tara. She's in cyber tech, in like security. She is ace, and she's asexual and aromantic, and she's just such an interesting character, but she also feels like she has to, you know, show her personality. And so she wears all these bright colors and these kind of out there outfits. And even when she's trying to be like incognito, she just can't help but stand out because she's just such a unique individual character. And all of these characters felt like that. They felt so fleshed out. So the main conflict is that Misha goes into a meeting for his TV show. It's like the season finale. It's the big bang. It's like everything that this has been culminating towards, and he's ready to like to out his characters and give them a happily ever after. But his boss, the suits in corporate America, the ones with the money, the ones in charge of the media that's being processed and pushed out, they have other ideas, and they think it'd be better for the algorithm if they just died. So this is a whole nother layer about queer tragedy in here as well, and how the media kind of leeches onto that and uses it. But like in Camp Damascus, Tingle also talks about in this one how we need to be exploring other sides of queer identity in media, in books, in movies, and all of that, not just queer tragedy. And he makes it a point to talk about how genre cannot be definable. The characters are who they are, and they don't change, but the tone can change. What happens to them can change. Let's focus on something else. Let's focus on queer joy. Let's focus on queer catharsis. Let's see other stories, other representation within media. That's not just this one negative thing, because that's what gets views, that's what gets clicks, that's what gets money. It's a whole revolution, this book. I'm exhausted talking about this. I feel like there's so much more I still need to tell you about it too, and I don't know if I have it in me, if I'm being honest. They're like, we'll sue you if you don't do it. So essentially he has to like fight the man or do what they say. And meanwhile, he's also starting to see things in real life that he's not sure are real or what's going on, but he's starting to see his own creation coming to life around him. One character is called the Smoker, and he will approach people and ask for a light, and if they cannot give him one, he will pull their bones out through their back and grind them up and smoke them. He'll do that within 5 days. And so that happens to Misha, and he starts seeing other characters that he's created in his other works. So we are getting that, like, is it supernatural or is it not throughout, which I typically like, but it actually doesn't go either direction, I don't think. I think that can be argued anyway. It goes like a totally new direction that it didn't tell you it was gonna go, and that kind of bothered me a little bit as I was reading it, but as I got that explanation, as I got the social commentary and the things that it was saying about it, I changed my tune a little bit. On one hand, I just don't like it when authors do that, but on the other hand, there is even a quote in here that he says about books, or like how characters will find their audience. Where is it? Genre and tone are not set in stone. Characters are themselves. If the story is good, it will find its audience. Oh, there's some nasty body horror in here too. The worm scene, if you've read this, the worm scene, oh my gosh. If that creeps you out, then beware. And then we also get, not flashbacks per se, but like chapters from Misha's childhood where we're learning what inspired these creations, these monsters that he's made over the years, how that's connected to his character and everything in his own journey that he's going through. It's just so well thought out. Like, it's so much. How did you do this in a year, Chuck Tingle? Why are you a genius? I think it's great. It's fabulous. 5 stars. Let's move on. I have one more to talk about, and you probably already know what it is because I already mentioned it, and that is The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin. I got this copy from Pango Books. I am on Pango if y'all are interested. I'll put that link down below, but it's in my link tree. As always, we read this for the Midnight Society Book Club. I talked about this at length with my best friend Sandra, as well as Megan from Reading with Meg. I will link the live show above and below, and I'll try not to get too in-depth with this review because we get into so much detail about this, and I loved discussing this. This was one that I had been wanting to read forever, that I have kind of understood what it was about just based on where it pops up in the zeitgeist. I have read a lot of books that were inspired by this that I loved as well, so I thought it was time to read the actual book. It also just came out with an audiobook, for the first ever audiobook for this novel or novella that came out in like May. So I think that's part of what put me off, was that I didn't have an audio, but the audio is fantastic. So highly recommend that. In fact, I think that might be the best way to listen to this. And the writing doesn't feel old-fashioned in here if you're worried about that. It doesn't at all. It is direct and straightforward, but this book is so beautiful in its simplicity. I love that it's so short. It's very direct. Like, it's not hiding anything. If you're unaware, what this is about this family. Joanna is the mother, Walter's the dad. They have 2 little kids, and they're from New York. She's a photographer. She's very much into women's liberation, and this was during, the 70s, during the first wave of feminism, where women are trying to get equal rights, equal pay. They're trying to get into the workspaces, essentially. It's very focused on white feminism as well. So they moved to this town of Stepford, almost like everything's stuck in the 50s in Stepford. If you've ever seen Pleasantville, it's like all they want to do is spend their time cleaning their house, devoting their lives to their husband, to their children. They don't want to have any interests of their own outside of the home. And when Joanna moves here, she's like, what is going on? What is happening here? It's kind of weird, but she does make some friends. Bobby is one of them. Once the women have been in Stepford for a certain amount of time, and in this case, it's 4 months. It's 4 months. That's how long this book covers, 4 months of time. You kind of change. You change. I also feel like I should just spoil this because this book is from 1972. And if you don't know it, then you should. Kind of thing. I'm gonna spoil you. Okay, here, I'm gonna spoil you. If you don't want to be spoiled, skip to whatever this time says. So the women are robots, and the men have gotten together with all of their powers combined, created versions of their wives. There's one guy who's an illustrator. There's another guy whose name is Diz, and he used to work on the animatronics at Disney. There's another guy who's really into accents and speech, and he records their voices. The thing that's so sinister about this is that it doesn't seem like it's happening as you're reading it. It's like you have to read between the lines. You have to put your own interpretation on it. And there's also kind of an open ending. Like, there's an ambiguous part in this. Like, most of it's very ambiguous. You have to decide what you think happened, and then based on that, you can figure out what else happened that's not written on the page, what's happening off the page. I loved it. I thought it was like so perfectly succinct, easy to read. Again, the audiobook was amazing. It ends in a way that I love my books to end. It was a super quick read. It's just, Ira Levin's doing so much for feminism. I love him for that. Like, I don't think this book would have been what it is if a man hadn't written it, because even the reviews I've seen, even the foreword or afterword by Peter Straub, he talks about how funny it is and how satirical it is. And it's satirical if you're looking at it from the point of a man who's reading it in 1972, like, oh, these men are they're offhanded. What are they doing? If you're reading it as a woman, it's not quite that funny. It's really not. It's scary. And that's what I love about social horror, because depending on your perspective, the entire tone can change. Ira Levin's also the author of Rosemary's Baby, which I read recently and really enjoyed as well. I'd love to get to read some of his other stuff, so definitely open to doing more of that in the future. But I feel like as a booktuber and as like someone who likes feminist fiction, that it is my responsibility to have read this book, and now I can say that I've checked that off. So I am very happy with that. I love the direction this went in. Again, watch that live show if you want more details, more juicy details. And that's gonna be it for this month. Y'all, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite book you read this month was, or if you have any recommendations for me based on these titles that I've shown you. I always love to hear from you guys. I am currently working on my most anticipated new releases that are coming out for the fourth quarter of 2024. So that would be October, November, and December. Keep your eyes peeled for that one. Hit that subscribe button if you don't want to miss that, because I do come out with those videos quarterly. Don't forget that life is short. So read Wryly. Cheers and goodbye!